Hello everyone, welcome to my Tales of Phantasia retrospective video. I have so much pressure on me for this video, oh my god. Like, literally 5 different people were like, oh, I'm really looking forward to the retrospective, and I'm like, well shit, I've got to figure out things to say now. Because in all honesty, it was funny, when I first read those comments, I'm like, I don't have much to add over what I already said. But then I sat down, I looked at it, I researched some things, and I do have a lot to talk about now. So I'm glad, because I was feeling super pressured whenever everyone was like, oh, I'm really looking forward to this. So, as always, let me go ahead and start with the good, because I have a bad habit of focusing on all the negatives in retrospectives, because they're frankly more interesting to talk about. But I do want to explicitly talk about, there is a lot of really, really good stuff in this game. In the last episode, I did mention that it's a complete Tales game, and I was completely prepared for it not to be. I was completely prepared for it to be the first iteration and be a, like, dim shadow of what the series would come to be, similar to Persona 1, or, as I mentioned, Suikoden 1, or the original Legend of Zelda, or the original Metroid. Like, all of those games, if you go back and look at them now, they can't hold a candle to what the games have become. Original Final Fantasy is like that too, although I would argue that the Final Fantasy had its, peak not at its current state, but still, if you go back and try to play the original one, oh my god. I'm not going to say it's bad. If anyone tries to say the original Zelda is a bad game, I will fight them. But yeah, they definitely refined the formula and made it way better in later iterations. The original Metroid is, like, legitimately not a very good game. It's an incredible, they certainly made it better. So I would say the same thing about Tales of Phantasia. The later games are certainly better, but Phantasia itself is really good. And I absolutely do not have anything negative to say with the game overall. I think it's a massive triumph. There are some problems it has, but there's also some really, really, really... It's astounding how well it holds together. I also want to take a moment and just give a, I guess, shout-out. I don't really know what to call it, but the way that there are certain scenes that happen in the game that hold up even today. The game as a whole doesn't, but right before you go into the final battle, where you have that, moment where Clarth uses his one chance to use Origin in order to examine something that's already happened, and he uses it to go back and just see his wife, because it's been forever since he got to see her. Oh, that just tugged at my heartstrings. That was such a wonderful moment in the game. It's one of those things that if, Tales was a, like, pen and paper RPG, you would never do. The ability to see something happen in the past is such a powerful ability, but Clarth is just like, no, this is what I want to see, and it makes so much sense, and it's so you really feel for Clarth in that moment. Same scene, actually, with Suzu, and kind of talking to her dead parents and talking about how she tries to be the way that they would want her to be, but she's having a hard time, and you really see behind the veil of her character. And I do wish I'd had more of a chance to use Suzu and get to know Suzu. She came in way too late in the game, and she would have been really, really interesting. Suzu is the most potential character I've got. I really wish I'd been able to use her more. She is, ironically, the closest one to Tales of Symphonia in that she may or may not be related to Sheena, but she is so not Sheena, and it would have really been interesting to get to know her better. But yeah, that scene was just absolutely terrific. I also thought it was really, really interesting that Arsh was in certain ways the least and the most mature character in the game. Day to day, Arsh was always the one that was goofing off, that was, getting distracted. She was very much a comic relief character, but she was also the only damn character that actually cared about Daus's motives. And every time she would try and bring it up, Kless just kind of, like, had a freak out roid attack. It was like, and would yell at her for not just hating Daus without, wanting to understand him, or with wanting to understand him. And I totally get why Kless was like that. I actually am glad Kless was like that. At the time, I was frustrated with Kless, because I'm very much a person that thinks knowing your enemy better is always worth doing. But at the end of the day, I don't want to play a game where the main character is just, super smiling, insert character, Joe with no negative quantities because you're supposed to like him and therefore he can't do anything wrong. I am glad that Kless was nuanced and that there were certain areas where he was blind. There were certain areas where his frustrations got in the way. I thought that was a cool aspect to him. Later Tales games have a bad habit of making the protagonist too perfect. You know, in a lot of ways, the protagonists of Tales games are often the most boring characters. I know I've said before that they've gotten better about it, but in Tales of Graces, Asbel was just not a very intriguing character, and to a certain extent, Lloyd was like that too. The characterization in these games is certainly not the best. Or I shouldn't say the characterization. The character arcs are not the best. The characters are kind of the same when you meet them to the end of the game, other than those couple of scenes I just mentioned. But I was really happy to see that the characters were flawed, and the characters had a lot of different things going on. The other really awesome thing that Tales of Phantasia does, excuse me, is just it's got so many just random side things, and there's so much extra stuff to do. I was really kind of expecting Tales of Phantasia to be a narrow, straight shot game, kind of in the vein of like Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV didn't. I mean, there were some side things to do, but for the most part, you just follow the plot. It was Final Fantasy VI that really, at least in my mind, introduced a lot of the extra side stuff. But oh my god, Tales of Phantasia had it in spades, and it was really well handled. There was a lot of stuff that I could see was out there, and I couldn't figure out. Granted, I didn't really stop to try and figure it out. I try and keep a authentic blind run, and if I don't know how to do something, I'm not going to stop and look it up, and I'm not going to spend camera time just searching through every little nook and cranny of the world. But I was really glad at just how wide the world was and how much stuff there was actually to do in it. Made me really, really happy. That said, there are some things that I need to talk about in terms of, areas where the game fell down a little bit. And overall, I've got to say that the only real issue, and I kind of brought this up at the culmination video, was that Tales of Phantasia does have a definite problem when it comes to being stretched out and putting in extra content just to make the game take longer. There were a couple of things that happened, and as I went back and I looked at the game as a whole, they don't really seem to be there for any particular purpose. Specifically, I did talk about the dungeon design. There's several areas where the dungeons just don't tell you what the hell to do and make you wander around. This happened in the final dungeon where you get to an area and it's like, oh, there's a map and there's a shortcut written down. No indication where the shortcut is, and you just end up wandering around until you see a hallway that just sends into the dead end for no reason. And that's a clue. Oh, you can walk behind the scenery, which is also just dumb, because from Kless's point of view, there's no way you wouldn't see that. Douse's first castle, where you have to go back through like half the damn castle in order to get to a mirror that you saw earlier, but you didn't have the magic mirror yet. And then the Valhalla Plains battle, where you just get lost and wander around for several hours before you get to the boss. Those were all things that I feel like someone used the term Nintendo hard in comments, and that's a very, very good term for it. It was just set in there in order to make you spend more time, in order to make you feel like you got more value for your money. It's not good game design, and I'm glad the later games have kind of gotten away from that. The other things that are kind of reminiscent of that is like the Dameol or Demeter. I forget which term. I think it was Demeter in the game, but then people told me it was a translation error. It should have been Dameol. But regardless, that was just sort of there. You go through and, oh, the ships aren't running because this guy, go stop him. Okay, you've stopped him. On with the plot. There was no connection to anything. It was like, apparently Dameol was being mind controlled by Dause, but that was it. And it seemed like a very, very awkward road bump where the actual Dameol storyline didn't go anywhere. It was just, Dause is bad. He's mind controlling this guy. Kill him. Okay. Speaking of which, the also other issue is, why the hell were we able to free Laird from mind control, but we had to kill Dameol and we had to kill that one guy on the boat? explicitly said that Klutz was not able to do anything except for murder the guy, and he tried, and it was then we get to Laird, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, you can totally just break this talisman, and that'll fix them. Where the hell was the talisman the other people in the house was mind controlling? And while I'm on the subject, this is why I wanted to start with really good things, because there's just so many little things that I knew I'd have to talk about. Why did Daus was mind controlling all over the place for the first maybe third of the game, and then he just stops doing it? I kept expecting him to mind control Arsh or someone, and he never did. he mind controlled 3 people before anything really happened, and we broke those 3 people out of it, and then he just sort of forgot he could mind control apparently. The other thing that was kind of weird, this really isn't a time sink, but it was an oddity, and that was when you have to go into the Fenrir temple and then the Tower of Odin. The actual dungeons were fine. I thought the dungeons were cool, but the storyline was that there used to be these 3 kingdoms. And then Fenrir declared war on Odin, and then Thor was involved because they were all superpowers. And Thor was trying to stop the fighting, but Fenrir didn't want to stop the fighting. And I looked this up to make sure I remembered it correctly. Then mysterious people showed up and obliterated the superpowers. And that's it. That's where that storyline stops. And you have to go in and get, Flamberg, and I forget the name of the other weapon, but Fenrir's ice sword. But that's when I actually was playing that, I thought the mysterious figures were Daus and his minions. But when I went in and researched Daus, I found out that no, he comes out of, when he comes from Daris Karlon, he shows up and is actually picked up by Winnie, or I forget her name. It starts with a W. But there is one of the original 4 heroes that gets replaced by us, and we never actually meet in the game or hear any tale of in the game. But it's one of the original 4 heroes, finds Daus, and then Daus kind of recovers and then goes on his I need to stop, magic technology thing. So definitively, the mysterious people that took out superpowers had nothing to do with Daus, but we never hear any more about them. It's just this massive plot thing that is begging for more information, and there is no more information to be had. It's really weird. Also really weird, and this isn't really weird, but it's interesting, and I don't really understand why it's there, because it feels like it should go somewhere and it doesn't. Granted, this is not in the actual game, but when I looked up Daus, and when I researched that because I was curious whether the mysterious figures were related to Daus, and I found out they weren't. I also found out that Daus was the prince of a nation in Daris Karlon. One of the really powerful nations. 2 other nations in Daris Karlon went to war, and Daus, tried to exert political pressure and say, "Hey guys, stop fighting," but he wasn't able to get them to stop, which is weirdly the exact same thing that happened with the 3 superpowers. And it's really weird to me that the exact same narrative happened both times with these little fragmented stories that aren't really part of the main game. I don't know if that's lazy writing or if there's supposed to be a connection, but if there is, it's never really explained. It's really weird that before Daus got to Phantasia, or whatever the name of the world is, the thing that happened in Daris Karlon that kind of ruined it also happened here. Literally the exact same thing, except not quite exact, because there was no mana cannon. That's another thing. So, and this gets into this gets into my problem with the series as a whole. This is not in any way Phantasia's fault, but in terms of the series as a whole, we also very much have a situation where the technology is just all kinds of screwed up. So 3 different times with the mana cannon, with the Rayards, and with clerical arts, we have these devices being invented in Tales of Phantasia. Tales of Phantasia, Midgard invents the mana cannon and unleashes it against Daus. Also, in Daris Karlon, one of those minor nations invented a mana cannon and unleashed against the other one, which actually ended up being what destroyed Daris Karlon, because he used up too much mana and the world started dying. I don't know why I throat warbled there. But and then with the Rayards, though, we were invented in Tales of Phantasia. And then we found out like 80 years before Phantasia begins is when the clerical arts were codified. But prior to that, there weren't really any clerical arts. Except, of course, all three of those things that existed 9,000 years ago in Tales of Symphonia. And it's just, like, maybe I could, like, ignore the Rayards, or maybe I could ignore the Mana Cannon, because both of those were individual events. And, okay, there was probably, especially with the superpowers being obliterated, maybe the technology and the information was lost. Sure, I could kind of believe that. But the clerical arts were super widespread. You know, and don't just tell me it was because Colette was the Chosen, because I ran into a lot of guys that had access to clerical arts in Symphonia. That's a massive plot hole. And frankly, I mean, it's relatively minor, I can get past it, but it kind of makes me feel like what the Symphonia should not have been a prequel. It should have been a sequel, because if you're going to have all of these different devices in it, you can't make them devices that were discovered in Phantasia. Like I said, I can get around some of them, but the fact it's as widespread as it is, that Symphonia really feels like not a prequel. I almost feel like it was an homage to Phantasia, and then halfway through development, they just said, hey, let's make it a legit prequel. And without really thinking about the fact that they had story elements that don't make sense for a prequel. I thought about this a little bit. I think what would have been really cool is if, and granted, they would have had to change some of Symphonia to make this happen, but if instead Symphonia had taken place in Darus Carlon, at the end of Phantasia, we do see Daus being summoned by Martel, and so it's not unreasonable to think when a Mana Seed is created, Martel may have sent it to Darus Carlon, because she did honor what Daus was trying to do. But when the Mana Tree was born, it was not able to sustain Darus Carlon, but they at least had a Mana Tree, and so they split the world. I feel like they could have made Symphonia that. I feel like they could have made it, you know, the story of Darus Carlon once Darus Carlon, you know, got the Mana Seed. Only they couldn't sustain it, so they split the world, and then they could just tell it that story. Granted, they couldn't have obviously had, you know, Kratos go up to Darus Carlon at the end, but still, I feel like they could have made a story that did not have these contradictions, because the contradictions bother me. And obviously, like I said, that's a problem with Symphonia, not a problem with Phantasia. Phantasia can't plan for what Symphonia is going to do when it's created, but it does end up, I'm just like, oh, this stuff doesn't really flow and doesn't really work. The last thing I want to talk about is that I feel like I'm glad that Symphonia wasn't just all the ancestors of, you know, Clarth and Cress or Kless, whichever one you prefer. I do think it's supposed to be Cress. And, you know, Mint and all of them. I think it may be that Colette is meant to be an ancestor of Mint, only because they look freaking identical. Like, they legit look. If nothing else, Colette is definitely based on Mint in terms of her character design. But I like to think that Colette is meant to be an ancestor of Mint, because they just look so overwhelmingly similar. However, that makes me stop and think for a second, because Suzu looks nothing like Sheena. It's actually interesting. Sheena is almost an inverse to Suzu, in that, you know, Suzu is 11 and prepubescent. Sheena is extremely post-pubescent and very well developed. I don't mean to be crude about it, but she just is. Suzu has brown hair and, like, violet eyes, whereas Sheena has, like, purplish hair and hazel eyes. So they seem to be almost inverted. And so if I'm going to say that Colette is Mint's ancestor, then does it make any sense for Suzu and Sheena to be related when they look so different? But they have the same last name. And I've almost convinced myself that Suzu isn't actually related to Sheena. That what actually happened is that their last name is an honorific, and it is given to the family that rules the ninja village. And in the 9,000 years between Symphonia and Phantasia, that the ruling clan has changed probably several times. So in actuality, I feel like Suzu may not be related to Sheena. It's just a matter of she is the chieftain's daughter, just like Sheena was, and so she has the same honorific last name. Now, granted, that's not 100%. That's just like a mind thing I've got going on, because clearly 9,000 years is plenty long enough for them not to really physically resemble each other anymore. I mean, hell, if you look at Symphonia, Lloyd is Kratos' legit son, and he has brown hair, and Kratos has red hair. So, obviously, hair color is not the do-all, end-all of who is related to whom, but I still kind of like the idea that Suzu and Sheena aren't actually related, only because it is actually super common in Oriental cultures that your name changes as your rank changes. In fact, there are some Asian cultures that you'll get a naming day whenever you become an adult. Until then, you've got this like placeholder name. And also, if you go back and you look at the Sengoku Jidai, if you actually look at it, a lot of the people involved in it changed their names like 9 times. They just keep making these more and more impressive names as their prestige rises. So the idea of the last name not being as good an indicator of family as it is in Western culture seems very, very, very correct. And we do know, obviously, the Ninja Village is based on Japanese culture. So that's sort of my thoughts on that one. And that's probably a pretty good... those are kind of my thoughts on Phantasia and its relation to Symphonia overall. At the end of the day, again, I really like Phantasia. I like Phantasia way more than I thought I would. It is... I actually think that Phantasia may be my 5th favorite Tales game. I feel like it's a better Tales game than Zestiria. Maybe Grace's. Grace's is hard, because Grace's is a lot more fun. But the characterization in Grace's is very hit and miss. Like I said, Asbel just annoys the crap out of me. But I really like Pascal. Pascal's probably my favorite Tales mage, so it's hard. I'm not... Grace's is close. Dawn of a New World, probably, yeah, I probably do like Phantasia better than Dawn. I still do think I prefer Symphonia, but that one's close as well. Only because it's interesting. Symphonia actually lowered a bit in my eyes after playing Phantasia, just because there are so many plot inconsistencies built into the way Symphonia was handled that I didn't know about before. And now I've just got a sour taste in my mouth, but I feel like that's just because I just found out about it. And I think that over time it's going to matter less and less. It already matters less now than when I first noticed it, because they are relatively minor. But Phantasia's good. I like it.